All right. Good morning again. For folks on the West Coast. Good afternoon for people here on the East Coast. Good evening for people who are calling in from England. And welcome and hope you're enjoying the recording to people who are watching this tomorrow from Australia, where it's 3 in the morning right now. Welcome to our third webinar in this series. It's been a bit of an adventure so far. We are um, you know, we're doing this together. And so we've had a lot of great responses to the first two, a lot of great ideas coming from the community, and it's been interesting. So before we get to housekeeping, just a quick welcome. As you can tell, the background is different from last week. My name is Patrick. I'm still in New York City, where has become certainly the epicenter of coronavirus in at least in the United States. I mean, one of the most concentrated versions in the world right now. So even the last week I was alone in our office building. Now I'm in my apartment in the East Village. So two things you might hear are sirens outside the window at some point, and then there's a very loud baby in the apartment next door. So you might hear him at some point. And I'm just have a lot of empathy for his parents, who I know are both working right now and managing a 9-month-old. So I know a lot of you guys are going through the same thing, either taking care of young kids or older kids, juggling things with your partners and trying to find the right space to work without killing each other. Many of you are taking care of older relatives or your parents, and it's just a stressful time. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this is a nice hour in community together in what are otherwise just wild times. Quick notes on housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been muted. This is for your sake and for mine. We had more than 1,000 people sign up for this overall. Please put questions in the Q&A form, which is different than the chat form. We'll be monitoring this. I'm obviously alone in my apartment, so it might take us a minute to get to the questions, and we'll do those mostly at the end. If you want to chat to the whole group in the chat function, there's a little button at the bottom that says chat to attendees and panelists. If you just go to panelists, it will just come to me, and I'm mostly not looking at the chat as we talk. We'll answer questions at the end. We do have a lot to cover today, so it may be that we go almost the full hour. And if that's the case, I'll stick around for more questions, but I want to make sure that people who've only signed up for 12 to 1 Eastern can get off and go do other things as well. So I'll stick around for a while at the end. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Certainly won't get through all of them. The recording and slides will be sent around after the event. So if you missed something, if you want to share it with your coworkers, etc., that will be there for you. All of the recordings from previous webinars are also on our resources page, which you'll get a link to after the event. And then please just fill out the survey at the end. If you think, wow, Patrick and FreeWill put in a ton of time to this, how do I say thank you? The best thing you can do is give us feedback on how to make this even better, what resources you need, what you think the community needs, and that will allow us to continue to iterate on things like this. So thank you for being here. Thanks so much. Agenda for today, we'll do some quick introductions. We'll share feedback from last week. We'll do some updates from the nonprofit world and what we're calling our new normal, at least for 2020. We'll talk about Plan B, which is what we're all moving to, and the resources that are available to you and what you might find useful. And then we'll do some next steps in Q&A. So I'll go through this fairly quickly, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Okay, so quick introductions by some of you know this. If you're here, we've been with us for the first 3 weeks. My name is Patrick Schmitt. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of FreeWill. Here I am in an office that is now vacated. We founded Jenny Xia Spradling, who's wonderful, and I founded FreeWill when we were grad students at Stanford a few years ago after doing a ton of research around planned giving. Jenny is just wonderful. We'll talk about her a little bit more later. And the rest of the team, we're so lucky to have them. And some of you have asked how the team is doing. People are generally in high spirits. Some people may or may not have been sick, but are recovering. It tends to be a young, healthy crowd. 55 people who are now spread out across the country. Some of them are at home with their parents. Some of them are at summer houses. Some of them are just still in New York City, hunkered down like me. Overall, the team has raised more than $1.25 billion in completed bequests. We're so proud of them, and it's just a joy to be alongside them. In particular, I want to call out my colleague Simone, who is sort of front and left in this photo, and has just put a ton of work into all the templates and resources that you guys have seen. And so we're really lucky to have her, and so is this community. Okay, so FreeWill's mission long-term is to help raise $1 trillion for nonprofits. But right now, as a startup, we are used to moving extremely quickly and extremely nimbly. We know that that is not true for all of your organizations. That is totally okay. You've been great because of your consistency, but this is a moment for rapid changes, and we're here to help. So our goal is to help you to continue to thrive and survive in this chaotic moment as you're all doing your best. All right. So let's talk about you this week. Some really interesting data that we've seen as the community evolves week to week. First things first, who signed up for this webinar? More than 1,000 nonprofit professionals, primarily in planned giving and major giving. From the US, from Canada, from the UK, from Australia, as you know. And then obviously you're just working really hard to support your organizations, to help those missions thrive. And on top of this, you're dealing with a whole bunch of personal challenges for the first time. Some of you are dealing with family challenges outside of that. And so we know this is a hard time, and we're doing whatever we can to support you, both personally and professionally. Okay, so we asked folks, what are you worried about this week? Not a huge amount of change from last week. So 37% still said not being able to hit goals. 36% said the health and safety of coworkers. 41% said the health and safety of donors. 25% said potential layoffs or losing my job. This is a slight increase from last week. And 25% said all of the above. And we'll actually talk more about how to avoid layoffs or losing your jobs in a second, because we know that's been a concern. All right, but how are you feeling? And this was really interesting to see. So we've been polling the same data, the same questions for a few weeks. And here's something really interesting. So 45% said anxious, which is still pretty high. And certainly I'm feeling anxious sometimes. My team is as well. This is down 17% in 1 week. At the same time, people who are feeling eager and energized to help is up 17% in the course of the same week. So pretty dramatic shifts. And what we're seeing is that people are taking stock of the situation, which is a little chaotic, taking a deep breath, and now realizing, okay, we need to move forward, and feeling energized because many of you are in a position to help and not just survive. 31% are happy. This is a big jump from last week as well. 9% are lonely or isolated. I was actually very surprised to see this go down as people are continuing to work from home, but it's a really interesting point. 14% are confused. There's still this sense of, what do we do now? And then 11% are sad, up 2% as all this tragedy becomes a little bit more real. So there's a big range of emotions. They're all obviously totally okay. And that's what the community is doing this week. So if you're feeling one or more of these, and you're probably feeling more than one, that's okay. And you're obviously not alone in it. Okay, feedback from last week. This is the summary of what we talked about in week 2. So first, really get your head around this, and we'll talk a lot more about this week. Expect some time before visits and events continue. Most of the things you're used to doing are not happening for a while. Make a plan now. By the way, the recordings of week 2 and week 1, which have a lot of great content in them, are all on our resources page. We'll share that afterwards. We do our best not to duplicate content week over week because so many people are coming back, and we're building on it. We're adding more templates, more thoughts, more ideas, but it means you're missing out on a lot of cool stuff from week 1 and week 2. So feel free to go back. One tip I have is that on YouTube, if you're a quick learner, you can actually put it on 1.5 times speed or 2 times speed to get through it quickly. Second, best practice, phone, email, letter templates are all available for you. A lot of people have said, how do I talk about X during this moment? And Simone, a couple other people on the team have put together a bunch of thoughts that you can just feel free to use with or without attribution, make it as easy as possible for you. Donors are ready and asked to want to help, deliver joy, and use what we call ask and acknowledge, which is say, we'd love for you to help. We also totally understand that some people can in this moment, and that's okay. And actually that choice will give people even more willingness to help if they feel like they can. And then lastly, this community has so many good ideas. If you go to the end of last week's webinar, we share a bunch of things that have been submitted from the community, and we'll keep sharing those. And we'll get through this together. Before we continue, I did get a question from Hamilton, who maybe some of you are wondering this. He says, do you arrange your books by color? That is fascinating. Actually, that is true, in case you are curious about that. It's what started out is in the top, your left, my right, I put all my travel books together, which are blue Lonely Planet books, and that looked interesting. So it was a natural evolution of that. So if you've been wondering that, that is the answer. Thank you, Hamilton, for asking that. Okay, last week, what went well? 60% of you said this was a 5 out of 5 in terms of being helpful. Another 37% said a 4, and a few said a 3. So we studied all the feedback, especially the folks that were 3 and a 4, to think through what would get you guys to a 5 to make this as helpful as possible. Also, positive feedback was really helpful. Someone said, you're keeping us abreast of all the latest trends in planned giving during the crisis, but also creating a community, which we're really proud of. Positivity and problem solving was helpful, so keep that coming. And then people said things like, the templates and phone scripts are amazing, thank you. We've gotten a lot of feedback that people are already putting those into use and having a lot of success. So go take a look on our resources page. We'll share that after, and that will be really helpful. And then one other thing we did is, in the first webinar, it took us a day and a half to get you the recording because the servers on Zoom were so slammed by everybody doing video conferencing that it took us a day and a half to get that video processed. We changed format in the way we did it. We were able to turn that around in just a few hours last time, and we'll do the same thing today. So you should be able to expect that by this afternoon, which was a good iteration based on some learnings and mistakes from the first time. Also, we can do some things better. So people said, go faster through the stats at the beginning. We hope we did that this time. Tell us how to convince my boss that we should still be doing planned giving. We'll get more to that later in the session. Say, how can we plan future events that require 6 or 12 months of planning without knowing if events are still possible? We'll talk more about that. Someone said, as an older planned giving officer, I had a hard time finding the templates you discussed. So in our follow-up email here, we'll specifically point to those templates and make sure it's really easy to navigate if you're a little bit less tech savvy. So thank you for that feedback and keep it coming. And then we also heard, hey, thank you for using the Oxford comma, but it is not correct to use it in front of an ampersand. So we appreciate the attention to detail here. We have shifted that and keep any and all feedback coming. We're trying to make these as great as possible. Also, last week we decided to welcome the broader community to what we call free yoga, which is yoga we do every Tuesday and Thursday as a team. My colleague Megan on the right here, who's just amazing, and a big part of our partnerships team, also is a certified yoga teacher. And so she's been teaching that. We had 25 nonprofit professionals come on Friday, and a bunch more folks came on Tuesday. If you would like to join, we welcome you. It's 8:30 a.m. Tuesdays and 4:30 p.m. Fridays. These are both Eastern time. Just click yes in the survey, and we'll send you an invite. So everyone's welcome, totally free, definitely not any obligation. Just come, stretch your body, get some exercise, relax a little bit, and hopefully it will help you in your week. All right, so that was last week. Let's talk a little bit about our new normal for 2020 and what we're going to do about it together. All right, so you know what's happening in the world, but a couple of things to call out. The new stimulus bill was passed with key sections for nonprofits and checks for many Americans. We'll talk more about that later in this conversation. Major events, the French Open, other key sporting events are all moved to at least September and beyond. New York City right now may be on some version of lockdown through May. That will continue to be true for parts of this country. What that means for us is that virtually all in-person nonprofit fundraising work is postponed indefinitely, which is really hard for people who've been really good at this for a long time. It's also the case that when we think about getting back to fully normal, as people are really craving, a lot of the research shows that that's going to require widespread vaccinations, and that may be 12 to 18 months away to get back to fully routine. And so let's just get our heads around these timetables. What we shared about last week as you're thinking about fundraising events is, look, it's going to be a while. And so we shared this grid. I'll go through it a little bit more quickly than we did last week. But 0 to 3 months, it's just not happening. Cancel the event, get any money you can back, start moving to plan B. 3 to 6 months, it is extremely unlikely that you'll be holding fundraising events. Make no purchases, prepare to cancel, don't schedule anything new. 6 to 9 months, even this is probably less than 50-50. And frankly, it may be less than a third. So you should be treating these events as a plan B and feel lucky if we can do it. But our plan A should be around not having any of these. And even 9 to 18 months, it's really dependent on getting a widespread vaccine for vulnerable populations. Most of your events are having a lot of donors who are over 60, who are in this sort of more at-risk category. And so it's a difficult future to imagine, but it may be that we're going the rest of 2020 without any of these things. Quick note on these, as we talked about last week, so I'll go through it quickly. Events with high-risk populations will be the last thing to return in terms of this returning to normalcy. Even so, attendance will be lower until we have widespread vaccines and things are totally safe. People are now shifting into a mode of avoiding groups, and that won't bounce back immediately. It is the case that when we have events, expectations will be lower and people will be ready for authenticity and togetherness. And it doesn't have to be a Met Gala version of overly produced, incredibly perfect. The joy of togetherness and your mission will carry a lot of that through. So it may be that these events that typically require 12 months of planning can actually be pulled off in 2 or 3 months or even less. And then this timeline is going to be similar for donor visits to older donors. What we're looking at now is basically no visits to nursing homes, potentially for the rest of 2020, outside of extenuating circumstances. Retirement homes will be similar. It's also the case that generally people, if you are someone who's circulating in the general population, even in 6 months, it's unlikely that you'll want to be visiting 65, 75-year-olds, 85-year-olds in their home, which is hard to hear, but almost certainly true. And so I'd rather us be pleasantly surprised by the opposite than just continuously disappointed as this moves on. So let's go through some bad news before we talk about what to do about it. In a recession, giving typically goes down. It goes down by much less than the stock market and much less than the GDP decline. But in 2008, giving fell by 7% in inflation-adjusted dollars. And in 2009, it fell by another 6%, so about 13% in 2 years. Giving by people who are very wealthy dropped precipitously, whereas giving by people who had less resources actually dropped much less. So what we see is when there's compression of wealth in the stock market, et cetera, some of your major donors, your mid-major donors will decline a little bit more than your small dollar donors. This recession, as many of you are already feeling, will be especially hard for nonprofits. Why is that? Because every recession hurts people's ability to give. In this case in particular, it also hurts nonprofits' ability to ask. No events, no in-person meetings, and thousands and tens of thousands of people have incredible skills around building relationships, around running great events, and that has been the bread and butter of how we've been successful for decades. And many of these other skills are not necessarily things you built up because the plan A has worked so well. But for the next 4 to 12 months, we're probably seeing no non-essential travel, no large or even small events, and no donor visits to older folks. This is not a certainty. I'm not an epidemiologist, but we've been doing a lot of research into various scenario planning by places like McKinsey, by some of the think tanks that are advising the White House, and this looks to be at least more likely than not. So let's all be ready for it together. Okay, that means we've got to move to plan B. Plan A is out the window. We had all these great ideas. We had these great galas scheduled. We put a ton of effort into 2020 planning in the fall, and now it's out the window. So what do we do? First, just 2 quotes that I wanted to share as we think about the mindset that we're going to enter into as the team. First is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a neuroscientist and psychologist who's Austrian. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor and one of the sort of foremost thinkers on resilience. And what he says is when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are then challenged to change ourselves. So we have some fixed facts in the world, and now it's up for us to change to adapt to this. Second is a gentleman named Rahm Emanuel. Rahm was the chief of staff for Barack Obama, also for Bill Clinton, currently mayor of Chicago. This is one of the few quotes he has that isn't laced with profanity. He's sort of famous for that. But what he would say is never let a good crisis go to waste, or never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what he meant by that is that there's oftentimes, in a crisis, you can do things you couldn't do before, and it opens up new opportunities if you have that mindset of, okay, how do I make the most of this, as opposed to just looking at all the bad things that have happened. So, okay, great. So we look at new opportunities, and there's a couple of things that you might think of as being fortunate or being on the bright side here. So one is that you have cost savings from no travel, no galas, no events, etc. Some of you may not be paying rent for several months, and we'll go into that in a moment. But there may actually be more resources available to you than there would be otherwise based on this. Second, we'll talk about this in a moment. Generous government grants and loans for many nonprofits may actually bring in even more resources than you lost. 3, possible additional support for underemployed teammates. And so we'll talk about this in a moment, but this is a really key thing. There may be people who can't fully do their jobs right now, but still want to stay employed by your organization. Let's talk about how to put them to work in order to raise even more funds for the team. And then last, no commuting, no travel, no event planning. There may actually be a lot of time that you have back that was going to be out the window in 2020 in a normal world. And so suddenly you may have more resources, more team members, and more time. And we'll talk about making the most of it. Also, in terms of new opportunities for donor behavior, sorry, I'm just reading the Q&A on the left here. Donors are more reachable and receptive to conversations at any point in decades. People are really open. Every piece of feedback we've heard about people using the phone scripts, people using some email, is that the response has been overwhelming, and people are really ready to hear and ready to connect in a way that normally they're just too busy for. Donors are primed for impact and feel collective responsibility. Nobody is feeling alone in the world right now, and nobody's feeling like the outside world doesn't matter. This is one of the peak moments of interconnectedness, for better and for worse, that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, and probably for most people. Interest in estate planning is at an all-time high. We'll talk more about that in a second. But for folks doing plan giving, you may actually be able to do 2 or 3 or 5 years worth of goals and work in this year based on different donor behavior that we're seeing. And lastly, donor expectations have shifted dramatically. And this actually allows us to exceed donor expectations with less work than you would have seen in a different environment. So a lot of interesting opportunities here. I mentioned that interesting in estate planning is an all-time high. We've shared this before. This is the graph of Google searches for all of Google's history. March is by far the highest month. On FreeWill's public site, which you're seeing here, you can see that bequests by month are almost 50% higher than they've ever been in any month previously. This is a 450% increase in gifts over March 2019. The other spikes that you see are due to massive press coverage of FreeWill. Without massive press coverage this month, we're seeing skyrocketing giving rates. To put it in even more stark contrast, this is what it looks like week over week. And so as you move all the way to that right side, you can see that estate planning and people making planned gifts within estate planning is just skyrocketing at this moment. It's 600% more gifts than this time last March in 2019. So really striking stuff. And for those of you that are taking action, that are doing your job well, you'll see incredible returns for your team and just a level of interest from donors that you may not have seen at any point in your plan giving careers, even if you've been around for decades in this field. And the last thing to note is that it's not just the moment around people being concerned, it's that recessions generally see an increase in plan giving as people look for any way to help, even if they're not able to give as much in real time. Great. So let's talk about Plan B. Those are all the facts. That's the environment they're working with, and how do we change ourselves to meet this moment? Okay, first things first. I want to remind everybody, because we've had a lot of conversations with nonprofits over the last 2 weeks, and some folks are in this, what they call wait and see mode. And we love you, but also wait and see is not a plan. And what we expect is that some version of the current environment will continue for months, and restrictions on most of the behaviors that you normally do will continue for many more months beyond that. So if we're just sitting on our hands and not taking action, that is not a plan, and that will lead to some pretty considerable challenges in 2020. Our new normal will be here for the whole year, and let's plan around that. We should be open to being pleasantly surprised. We should not avoid making a plan because we're just having our head in the sand. And overall, and this is the message for you, but also for your bosses and for the rest of your team, the difference between success and failure in fundraising in 2020 will be the ability to change your plans to meet the moment. And this is a really key message, that it requires more agile planning and more quickly shifts in your work than you've been used to. And that's okay. You can do it. We can do it together. We're here to help. But it's going to require some pretty big shifts to be successful. So first, let's talk about this in 5 parts. One is on goal setting. So we asked people, has your organization changed its fundraising goals? And what we see is that 44% are not sure yet, 31% have kept the same, 16% are considering decreasing their goals, 2.2% are increasing, and then 7% have decreased goals already. So only 7% have cut their goals. Some people are considering it. A lot of people are not sure yet, as you can imagine. Here's our recommendation. So on setting goals, if you are doing COVID-19 work and you're a hospital, you're an urgent healthcare center, something else where you just have more needs than you expected, consider increasing your fundraising goals. And what we're seeing is that donors are really primed to help. And there's a lot of social media activity. There's a lot of other discussions that if you're doing life-saving work, think about increasing your goals because your organization needs the money. UNICEF is doing an incredible job right now. If you haven't signed up for their emails, get it. They're great, graphic, visual, other ones. Obviously, they've got a much bigger fundraising team than many of your organizations, but it will be a great source of ideas. If you are not doing COVID-19 work, you can actually check out last week's webinar that gave a bunch of examples on how to do messaging, but wait 2 months. You might actually surprise yourself based on some of these plans that you can actually hit your goals even in difficult circumstances. And then if you're doing planned giving, those goals should remain the same. And you will almost certainly exceed them based on all of the data that we're seeing. So definitely don't lower your planned giving goals if you can do anything to help it. Okay. Part 2 is on finances and a couple of steps to take immediately. This woman on your right is my brilliant, wonderful co-founder, Jenny. And what Jenny did is she spent all weekend creating a how-to guide on applying for the CARES Act Forgivable Loan. This guide has seen almost 4,000 views on it already from nonprofit professionals in basically a day and a half of working time. So it's been one of the most popular things I've ever done because it lays out step by step how to apply for a CARES Act Forgivable Loan. This is one of the most important financial things you'll do this year. This is what it means. It is up to 2.5 months of payroll expenses or $10 million for nonprofits. All of it is potentially forgivable, meaning that if you spend the money on staffing and you're not laying off staff, the government will forgive this entire loan up to $10 million. That is effectively a free grant of resources. And 2.5 months of payroll expenses, there are a couple of restrictions, meaning you can pay people up to $100,000, et cetera. There's a lot more details in that guide. Definitely check it out. We know that this isn't something that most of you will be responsible for, but if we can help move literally an extra $1 billion into the nonprofit world by helping you guide through this process, take it, send it to your executive directors, your CFOs, et cetera. There's a couple of things you'll want to have ready, but this is going to be a great asset to help keeping your team together and help you continue to thrive. And if you're getting 2.5 months of payroll expenses, payroll is for most organizations their highest expense with a couple of exceptions. This may be the difference between being able to be even better off this year or really struggling. All 501c3 organizations under 500 employees are eligible. There are other resources for organizations that are larger than that. We haven't gone into those in depth as much because a lot of those teams will have more sophisticated CFOs and finance teams that can help them. But for organizations under 500 employees that are 501c3s, this is a great tool. If those of you that are consultants or working in a for-profit business, there's also some ability to do that as well. Check out the guide. If you work at a 501c4, unfortunately, it's not eligible. Excuse me, my voice is a little bit shot from so much talking. So take a look at that. The other big thing as you're thinking about how to get a bunch more resources is one of the things that we've seen is that people should be asking for rent abatement. Again, this isn't probably part of your job if you're a plan giving director or a director of development, but you should be sharing this with your ED or your CFO, because a penny saved is a penny earned. And for many people, rent's going to be a huge portion. So commercial landlords, in some cases, are suspending rent when tenants are unable to occupy their space. So if you're not allowed to go to the office because the governor of Michigan or the governor of New York has ordered it, you may be eligible for rent abatement. For many of you, rent is a top 2 or 3 costs. It's one of these things we don't think about. But if we can take all that money and put it back into development, back into paying people's salaries, this will be a huge advantage for you. We have created a letter that you can send to your landlord and some talking points in that same guide alongside the grants. So know this is a little bit of a deviation from planned and major giving, but if we can help you save millions of dollars this year, that will help your team and help you do everything else in your mission. We want to make sure to get it out there. By the way, I'm not going to be able to take a ton of questions on the grants themselves. Feel free to go to the guide. I'm not an expert, but I did want to make sure you had that. Okay, let's talk through Plan B for marketing. As a reminder, do not stop your marketing. Donors have more time and attention than ever before. And one thing that people aren't realizing is that many donors, and I've talked to a lot of people in this category, have even more disposable income than they normally do, right? If most of your donors are upper class, and those are either retired or keeping their job, suddenly they're not traveling, they're not eating out, they're not going to bars, they're not going golfing. They actually may have even more resources than they would in a normal year. Now, some of that obviously is hurt by the stock market, but for people who are continuing to draw income, this is the big opportunity, and those people feel especially fortunate and are spending even less money. Donors will also be receiving less email and less direct mail from other sources, and so the channels that you're normally going through are going to be less crowded. So restaurants, travel, cruise lines, all these other things that are used to the Expedia emails you get, the Hotwire emails you get, the Priceline emails you get, the Airbnb stuff, all of that is going to disappear for a little while. And so actually there's less traffic as you try to get attention from donors. And then just a reminder, we talked about this a little before, direct mail is safe. And there's no research that shows it's not. Just make sure to do a last minute check for appropriateness. And I was talking to the team at Stelter the other day who do great work on direct mail, especially around plan giving. And they have a war room put together where they're doing last minute tweaks and edits to make sure it fits the moment. But that mail will continue to be extremely effective. So, FreeWill isn't doing any direct mail, but if you do it, continue, keep it up. It's a great way to continue to talk to and share messaging with your donors. Overall, one big shift we're seeing is that 60% of nonprofits are moving a lot to digital, and they're increasing their digital fundraising right now. We recommend that to be true for everybody. Here's what that looks like. So when you're revisiting your marketing plan for 2020, we would recommend a 50 to 75% increase in marketing. Most of this will come from email so that you're not increasing your marketing budget, but donors are ready to hear from you more than ever. In some ways, time is moving more slowly, or even more quickly, so that if you send an email from week to week, so much happens in that week that it will be more forgiven. It's also the case that people are really hungry for content and ready to help. You want to include at least one survey per quarter. You can do this over email. I'll talk more about surveys in a moment, but it's a great way to keep the pulse on your donor base and what they're looking for. As you saw earlier in this webinar, the differences in behavior, even from week to week, of this community is really striking. And so this will give you an insight into how your donors are feeling and what you can share with them and how to ask for funds in the best way. And then, as we talked about, most or all correspondence should mention the crisis. It would be irresponsible to not talk about what people are going through. Feel free to do that on your own, or you can take a look at the templates that we've created for you as either ideas, or feel free to just use them. Okay. Just a quick recap on the resources that are available to you this week. So later this week, we'll put together a 3, 6, and 9-month communication calendar. Obviously, this will be different for every nonprofit based on your own needs, but we'll put a sample together so that you can use that as a straw man to adjust after. We'll put the triple option email, which we've talked about has been wildly effective for a lot of organizations. We'll share more about that in a moment. We'll share templates for outreach individual donors with and without fundraising asks, newsletter inserts, virtual event invites, something we call the resilience email, a sample video email, and what we call the open door email, which I'm going to walk you through in just a moment. This is a really effective action, especially if your boss is saying right now, hey, we can't do any fundraising. This is a great way to do some fundraising, even in that case. So in week 1, we talked through the triple option strategy. And what we talked about is that it's an incredibly effective way to message plan giving or fundraising at a moment where there might be heightened sensitivity. Here's what that looks like. Zooming in on the core piece here, we would say there's multiple ways to support the Fairness Project, and we want to help you figure out the way that works best for you. Give a cash gift, use Amazon Smile, include us in a planned gift. And this one is for FreeWill partners, but obviously you can adapt it to your own planned giving needs. This is really effective, and Dr. Russell James and I, Dr. James is a planned giving expert for those of you in the field. Otherwise, you may not have heard of him. Brilliant guy. We spent a lot of time last week on a video that just got posted today talking about how to have this conversation or how to have this ask when you can't, people are sensitive to thinking about their own mortality. And by giving people options, it puts them in a different mindset of, let me evaluate what's right for me instead of thinking about mortality front and center. Now, here's what we call the open door email, which is a variation on the triple option that is even more of a soft ask. So a couple things I want to note here. This is a sort of a fictitious organization that I created over the weekend as a way to demonstrate what this looks like so that all of you would have a really tangible idea and you can then adapt it to your own work. So what this says is, dear name, hope all is well with you and your loved ones. I know many of you are feeling anxious during these challenging times. And then, as we've talked about in the past, we're really centering on being a human, right? So instead of being this faceless organization, we're centering it on the person who's doing the writing here. It says, our family's holding up okay. My husband and I have found separate workstations, me at the dining room table and him switching between the kitchen and a plastic folding table in the garage, depending on the weather. Our teenagers are more open to board games with us when they're not texting their friends, and we've caught up on the classic movies we've been needing to see. Casablanca was even better than I expected, right? This feels like a human writing to a human, which is what you really want to be doing. And then we say, I wanted to share with you what's been up with the land trust. And we all use land trust because it's difficult to think of land trust as being really front and center in the crisis, but this allows us to show that any organization can do something like this. Since we've all had to switch from homes, we've continued working at full speed. Yes, some of us are working on easements with infants on our laps, and others have been going upstairs to tell their middle schoolers to turn down the music while we're on video calls. But here are a couple of highlights of what we've been working on. So it shows resilience and persistence by your organization that is really easy to empathize with, more than a sort of esoteric institution is, but this human and this teams that you're actually funding can be really sympathized with. And then we write, so we share, we'll share a couple of examples of what the land trust is doing. We know that this crisis is hitting everybody differently, and we hope that you are doing okay. Some supporters have asked what they can do to help during this moment, so we made a list of 3 ways to help. Now, a couple of things are happening here. One is we are putting this list together in response to people asking, so it's less of a hard push, right? Someone else is asking, you are providing a service for people who do want to help. It also says, if you can help, we'd love for you to take a look, but please don't feel any pressure. We know this is a challenging time. And when you actually give people a choice and say, look, you have a choice, you can give or not, what we've seen from previous psychological experiments is that more people will give. But also you're being sensitive to people who can't. Some people will say, gosh, this is a hard time, I just can't do it. No problem. They haven't seen any asks here because they haven't clicked through that link. You haven't actually gotten their permission to ask, and you haven't asked. Our whole team is thinking of you and wishing you well. Signed, Jane, the executive director. Also, Jane's email is here so that people can establish more of a conversation if they want to. Now, if you have a 50,000 person email list or a 200,000 person email list, and maybe you don't want to do this, but if you're a smaller organization, it should be fine. And then what that link lands on is a blog post or a website. These should be really easy to set up. So you can just set a simple landing page up and say, great, here are the 3 ways to help. This is very similar to the triple option, meaning that there's a couple of different ways. You can include planned giving in here, but this is a very soft pathway that is still extremely effective. Okay, so that open door template is now on our resources page. Go check it out, go download it, make it your own. We'd love to see if you do use it, send us a copy and tell us how it works. And then on surveys. So normally you may not have to do a survey every quarter because people's lives mostly stay the same. What we're thinking about now is this is a rapidly moving situation, not just for you guys, not just for me, but for the whole country. Surveys, 1 per quarter. This allows you to pulse check your supporter base. You can see who wants to be ready to help. We know that not everyone's going to be there, but some people will and will be really hungry and frankly a little bored and ready to help. You can also see who's lonely and needs checking in on. So if you're asking people about how they're doing, you can actually surface who needs what. You also want to surface who has a donor advised fund. We talked about this a little bit last week. Donor advised funds are money that has already been set aside. So there's no risk of someone feeling economic insecurity about it. It's already there. And that you can make the case that this is the moment for people to give as much as possible out of that. And so what I wanted to do is actually share an example. I got this actually as a response to our own survey about what people are doing that's creative. This is the Summit Land Conservancy. And they did a social distancing in open spaces. So just a huge shout out to Summit folks, really creative. What you can see is we're asking people how they feel today. Excuse me. Have you gone to open spaces while social distancing? How are you using open spaces during the COVID-19 crisis? How do you feel when you're outside? What gives you hope right now? What do you need from the Summit Land Conservancy? And if you'd like, feel free to talk about why protected open spaces are here. Now, this is the moment to check in. It mentions the crisis. It talks about how people are feeling. But also, it provides this real opportunity to hope and for people to reflect on the value of this piece of this organization and what their mission is at this time. You can imagine it also really opens up conversations for people to follow up and say, I've heard this has been really important to you during this crisis. Would you like to talk about how you can help other people experience this as well? So this isn't exactly what we would suggest you do, but it's pretty close, and it's something that had been sent out in the last week. So really hats off to Summit being creative and thoughtful there. All right, coming back here. One other note actually is that one of the things that's most interesting is you can actually report back to supporters. People love content like this about how the community is feeling. And so make a note of that and think about, can we report back all the cool stories that people are using open space for? By the way, if you're a FreeWill partner, and I know a couple hundred of you are on the phone, just ask. We'll actually make one of these for you, and there's a couple of cool, sophisticated things we can do. Other people will create a template this week that you can use and you can adapt. I will note that there are some places, some great companies that do really cool, sophisticated surveys. If you use them, great, go do it. Make sure they're spinning these up pretty quickly. There's a lot of technology and upper level things that we're not going to do here. Those companies are really interesting and worth checking out. But also, especially as you're moving quickly, don't make this too complex. It's one of the mysteries to us that organizations can spend 3 months trying to make a survey. It's not that hard. You can do this. Don't worry about getting every possible question in. Getting a good pulse check will be great. Okay, part 4, one-to-one conversations. We've talked about this for a few weeks, but just to reiterate, because 70% of people are saying they're using more phone calls. Donors are more likely to answer the phone than any time in the last 15 years. You want to check in on donors and help them understand how the organization is changing. And our favorite tip is just go for a walk. Say, hey, do you want to hop on the phone for 20 minutes? We'll both go for a walk and stretch out. We've talked about this before, so we'll go through this quickly. You also want to think about this as a two-part strategy. One, call for a check-in and update, ask how you're doing. And then if they want to, you can say, hey, can I give you some ways that other supporters are getting involved? We can set up a follow-up conversation. And then your call two is prepared with a bunch of different options, including planned giving, including a major gift. And that can really help guide the donor through this, especially with new tax changes. There's even more to share. We've created some phone scripts that are free for you to use. People have already used them and had a ton of success. So if you do, let us know how that goes. Great. And then here's a big new idea that I don't think a lot of organizations are doing, but we would very, very strongly encourage it. So a lot of you have folks, security guards, museum guides, coaches, receptionists, et cetera, who are not working 40 hours a week right now because they just don't have as much stuff to do. You don't want to lay them off. We want to keep them around. We want to help them support their families. Those people can make stewardship calls as well. So not your top 10 donors, not your top 20, but everybody else, put those folks to work. Most of those people are good at human relationships. The stewardship call is not an incredibly hard one. They can use the same phone scripts. Then if someone says, yes, we're ready to hear more, that's where you want to bring in a gift officer, a trained professional, someone who's actually quite good at making that ask and has the sophistication to talk through the different options. But if your group can set up dozens of those for your professionals who are good at asking for money, you can do incredible things together. Phone scripts are obviously super, super useful for people who've never done any fundraising. And so feel free to share those with them as well. But what we've seen is that a lot of organizations are doing this and they're really connecting super well. And it's actually bringing a lot of joy, not just to the people you're calling, but the people making the calls who are otherwise feeling bored and stuck at home. So make use of that. It can be an incredible value add. Here's a new tip also. My dear friend, Kathy Sheffield, who's a consultant and runs a company called Think Giving, which is great, and also was the chair of CGP for a while, Charitable Gift Planners. What she's doing is sending handwritten notes with a relax or a stress reducer tea bag to donors or to other people in her community. This is a great idea. It's a great idea because it's super cheap. All you need to do is in your next grocery run or grocery delivery, get some of these tea bags that probably cost 12 cents each, drop them in the letter. There's no additional mailing cost. And it's okay if you don't have fancy cards or a letterhead at home. In that, just note, be like, hey, I didn't have a greeting card and I'm not going out to the pharmacy, but I wanted to send you a note anyway. And people will really appreciate that level of authenticity. The same people that we just talked about can also do this. If anyone has decent handwriting or even mediocre handwriting, they can write these cards. They will be incredibly well received. And the feedback that we're hearing from other organizations is that this stuff is working and working really well to build deep connections with organizations. And then lastly, when you're actually having that meeting, that second call, a phone call is great. But what you want to do is create the most intimate experience and most thoughtful experience you can. First, think about using video. A lot of people say my donors aren't that sophisticated. Google Hangouts and Zoom are actually gaining in popularity by older folks who want to connect with their family members or their grandkids, et cetera, who have been showing them how to do it. You can also say, let's hop on the phone. I'll help you set it up, and then we can hang up and talk over video chat so that you're not in a sort of like awkward space where people can't figure it out for the first 10 minutes. This allows a face-to-face conversation, which is frankly just much better than if I was talking to you over the phone right now. And then as you're doing that, don't just have a Zoom call. Say, great, are we gonna have coffee? Are we gonna have cocktails or wine? Are we gonna have lunch? Are we gonna have dinner? Are we gonna be on a cell phone, but be on a walk? Something that creates a more memorable, thoughtful experience, as opposed to the one of 15 video conversations they might have with their family and friends all week. So think about what's memorable, what's intimate. These are a couple of ideas, and we'll share more ideas next week as well. Last thing here is this is a huge moment for these one-on-one conversations. first things first, expand your prospect pool so you can use surveys to surface more folks. You can lower the threshold for whom you'll meet with. So if you're normally talking to people who are giving $5,000 a year, think about adding folks that are giving $3,000 a year or $1,000 or $500. Your team can likely have 2 to 3x the donor visits that you had last year. And this is a huge part of the reason how you can make up that gap in fundraising and even exceed your goals, because no travel, no need to go to different places. Many of these meetings will be shorter than they would if you were sitting across the table. And so you can have so many more meaningful conversations than you would otherwise, because you're just don't have so many of the other restrictions. And the donor expectations are not that you'll meet them in person or it's not a serious conversation. So really big opportunity there, especially with all that extra staff that you might be able to have. All right, we're wrapping up soon. Wanted to talk through about convincing your boss and board to invest in planned giving, which was a big question we got previously. And so later this week, we're putting together a sample PowerPoint presentation that you can use for the folks who need convincing. This will be editable. You can do whatever you want with it. But it will include things like data on the surge in planned giving that's happening right now, data on planned giving's effect on immediate giving. So we know, and Russell James did a lot of great research, that when you make a planned gift, giving immediately goes up by 75% for the next 5 years. It's not just long-term giving. And then also a reminder on the demographics of the great wealth transfer. And so the $68 trillion that will be inherited over the next 30 years, a lot of those decisions are getting made right now. And this is the moment for you to do more planned giving than usual. All right, so quickly, I want to sum up some of the ideas that have come from around the community, and then we'll get into Q&A. So a couple of ideas. We're going to start a photo contest asking people to guess which of our open spaces our dogs are in. We're going to send something to donors, a bottle of wine, tea bag, or coffee, and then ask to meet virtually. We're going to do digital town halls with major giving donors, really like this one. We are currently creating a digital engagement strategy across all channels with the messages, the Redwoods will be waiting for you, and giving people ways to have virtual experiences. We're doing couch concerts. So we're doing playlist suggestions from our conductors and video snippets of solos. Presumably this is an orchestra. We're doing videos from staff that are sent out every Monday by different departments to highlight where donations are being allocated. This is really cool. And again, these things can take like 10 minutes to create. You don't need a professional video team. Just take your phone and do your best. We're doing an online trivia night and a video appeal. Love that idea. We're doing virtual lunches with the president for high-level donors on Zoom. Your VIPs at your organization probably also have more time, and their ability to have dinner anyway with major donors is a really big opportunity here. People will feel really connected. And then I love this. We're doing videos of staff caring for the animals and lots of advice on how the virus does or does not affect pets as a way to deeply engage with folks and generate more giving. All right, last announcement. So many of you, we asked last week, would you like to gather with the people that are specifically focused on your issue area? And 92% said yes. So starting this week, actually tomorrow, but mostly next week, we'll be doing community roundtables. So higher ed, this is colleges and universities, tomorrow at 1 o'clock. You're welcome to join that as well. K through 12 education and other education organizations happening next Monday. Animals next Thursday, environment on Wednesday, faith-based on Thursday, health on Wednesday. Quick note, this health one will be mostly disease organizations, broader health, not hospitals. We'll plan a separate one for hospitals down the road a bit. Arts and culture happening on Friday. And all you have to do is RSVP in the survey that will drop in the chat momentarily. So I know we're coming up on time. Quick summary of this week. I know there was so much. Thank you everyone for listening and paying attention. One, wait is not a plan. Start acting now. Start revisiting, moving to digital, taking control of what you'll need to be doing to hit your goals here. Two, definitely check out the Small Business Administration loan guide. That may help you get $1 million or more for your nonprofit. Increase marketing thoughtfully. Increase capacity and activity around one-on-one conversations. A lot of those underutilized staff will be helpful. And then we can do this. This is going to be a hard time. It's going to be the year that you remember most in your careers for a lot of people, but we can make it through. So thank you, everybody. Quick next steps here. My colleague Simone, I believe, is dropping a survey in the Zoom chat. As a favor to Simone, who's been busting her butt to create all these email templates for you, please fill it out. We'll keep doing webinars for the next few weeks to help people navigate through the situation. And our team is here for you. So ask questions now, but if there's anything you need, new templates, new ideas, things that you want to share to bring value to this community, just email me or drop in the survey and we will figure it out. Thank you all. Sorry my voice is getting a little fading as we're going an hour straight, but feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A and I'll take a look at them now. We've got 44 questions. Let me go through a couple. A couple of people asked about the arranging books by color. Thank you for that. Chris asks, are your fundraising event expectations similar for non-fundraising events such as donor appreciation or outreach events? Meaning that in terms of the timeline, are we expecting fundraising events or all events to be canceled? Yes, we would think that anything you're doing for donor appreciation or fundraising are all going to be delayed. Honestly, you even look at things like NBA games and they'll mostly be played without fans for the first period. So I would start making a plan that doesn't involve any in-person gatherings. And then if you end up falling back on that, that is okay. Do we expect that donors will become disengaged or uninterested in digital events after a short period of time? Our annual event in the fall, and we're afraid that donors will be over the digital thing by that point. Jean, I think that if donors are still sort of stuck at home or social distancing and not able to do a lot of things, this will become the new normal in a way that things like podcasts didn't necessarily fall off a cliff after people got used to it. We will have to continue to be creative. And if you're doing the same thing a dozen times, it might get boring. But people are really going to be hungry for connection and content the whole time. Someone asks, we raised $420,000 in sponsorships prior to the gala and had planned to reach $500,000 with another $500,000 at the event. Any idea how to reach guests of guests that are now not able to attend and we don't know who they are? So this is a great question. First, on anything like sponsorship, ask if you can just convert it to a donation. Most people have said yes in our experience. Even commercial sponsors that are struggling are still not asking for refunds, so you'll be able to keep that. The best thing I would say is either, you have two options here in terms of guests of guests. One is just email or contact the people that you thought were going to bring a lot of folks, get names, and see if you can follow up with them one-on-one. The other thing you could do is, especially for your larger donors coming who are going to bring guests, is invite them to a dinner and invite them to bring some of their friends. Again, this is going to be over video chat. It's going to be really cheap for you to put on, but have your ED or someone similar do a series of these events with the folks who are going to join and bring others. You could do 10 dinners over 2 weeks at basically no cost because everyone's going to eat anyway, and really generate a lot of giving that way. And so what a lot of people will find is that canceling galas is the best thing that ever happened to them because they're saving all those expenses and still able to raise a lot of the money. Okay, next question. My CFO is asking if development is done for the year. He needs to update the forecast. How should I respond to this? I would share some of the data that we shared in this and feel free to use the slides themselves. It is very unlikely that giving is done for the year. And you can see the surge we're seeing in planned giving, but also a lot of organizations are seeing pretty remarkable results. I will find the data for 2008, 2009 and try to share it on a resources page, or more likely, if you need it desperately for your boss, just email me at that email address, Patrick@FreeWill, and I will track it down for you. Okay. Hi says, What is your take on the CARES Act? How do you expect it will impact our work? So a couple of key things in the CARES Act, besides the grants, which will be the biggest thing, frankly. One, it carves out $300 above the line deduction, meaning that no matter whether or not you itemize deductions, you can take $300 in charitable giving. That is not just a benefit. It's not a huge benefit to most Americans. It'll save them $100 or so. It's a great way to message and open that conversation. Say, hey, interesting news for you. I wanted to make sure you knew about this. Here's one option, is giving up to $300. And so you will see that. It's also the case that a lot of people who are getting this $1,200 check because their income wasn't that high, and particularly you'll see retirees who aren't working but still have a lot of funds, so that they're below the threshold to get the check, may turn that around and give it to causes they need it. So keep an eye on the news and when those checks are likely to hit. That's a good time for an appeal. And you'll see a lot of people who feel like this is found income and will be able to donate that pretty well. Randy says, you said publicly more forgiving in content they receive. So with our direct mail that has been printed months in advance, is it still okay to send with no mention of the current situation? As much as possible, I would say no. You want to make sure that content is updated. If it's printed months in advance, it could be pretty hard. If it's a letter, you might want to drop in like a little note that says, hey, this was printed 2 months ago, but we did want to include a little space that we're thinking about you. Our work is more important than ever. Hope you're taking care. And that can be printed incredibly cheaply, dropped in a letter that you're doing already. And your printer is probably going to be pretty amenable to that, knowing what the alternative is. John says, we just did that, dropped a note. Too early to see how it worked. So great, John. John, come back to us next week and let us know how it goes. Okay. Some of the questions we answered. An important fact check from an anonymous attendee. It says, Rahm Emanuel is not the current mayor of Chicago. It's Lori Lightfoot. Thank you. Rahm is the former mayor and not the current one. I appreciate that. Rachel asks, are you able to share what Zoom package you use in order to make this? Yes, you have a professional Zoom, and then you actually have to pay extra for the webinar. So it's an extra $150 a month or so to make it possible. And we had to bump that up even more because we had 500 people, more than 500 people come. So Maggie says, I'm fairly new to my organization and my relationship with donors are not as strong as I would like. Suggestions for engaging them when I do not feel strong connections. Maggie, just own it. Just say, hey, I'm new to the organization, but I've heard that this has been important to you for a long time. The organization is really important to me. So I wanted to call and check in on you. And you don't have to pretend otherwise. And people will appreciate the authenticity at a moment like this. All right, let's do 1 or 2 more questions. I have a very anxious, this is from an anonymous attendee. I have a very anxious CEO. She called to ask why she should call a lapsed major donor. I used the ask acknowledge example and said everyone has attempted to reach this donor and couldn't, and now we use her as leverage. She feels that every call should be an ask, and I have to remind her that's not the case, acknowledging now, ask on the next call. Thank you for helping me shine this with my CEO, but my point is that she wants us to make $2 million in the next 90 days. Unrealistic, but we're in a tremendous pressure cooker. Any advice to give her? That is a hard one. And what I would say is, take the next 30 days, check in on everybody, and then use the following 60 days to try to raise $2 million. That will be hard. I don't know what your overall budget is. If your overall budget is $100 million and this $2 million is there, if it's a huge shortfall, it might be harder. But if you're using that first step, you may open up some really interesting avenues. I would also have a really clear call with your board right now and see how much the board can chip in and who they think they might connect with. But you'll be able to have more donor conversations than you would in a normal circumstance because donors don't expect to be met in person. So we'll just make a long list and actually just start stewardship calls today. But good luck. I know that's challenging. Great. Let's do 1 more question, and then we'll read all of these. We'll incorporate a lot of them into next week, and we'll do it. Stuart says, could you restate the information around the 450% plan giving increase and the 600% increase? What are those percentages based on? So Stuart, that is data from our own site, freewill.com, which helps people do estate planning and nudges charitable giving. So we're tracking that, and we've got a big public site where people are just coming over the internet. We can see a dramatic increase in people searching for estate planning And then we're also seeing an increase in planned giving within a single will, as opposed to just more wills overall. And so that's a pretty dramatic number, but it's actually a great piece of data to use with your board or with your boss in terms of showing people that, not only can you talk about planned giving, you'll be wildly more successful than you would in a normal circumstance. So let's pause there. Good luck to everybody. It was great to see you all today. Check out the survey if you haven't already, and do sign up for one or more of those roundtables. Well, really one for your industry, but I know that people are not only interested in hearing from me, but really interested in hearing from each other. And so bring your best ideas, spend some time thinking beforehand what you can offer to the rest of the community, and good luck this week. Looking forward to seeing you all soon.